They say you don't feel the earth move when you fall in love, but they're wrong. For me, it was a Tuesday in Seattle, the kind of afternoon where the sky is the color of a bruised plum and the air smells like wet pavement and roasting coffee beans. I was standing under the awning of a bookstore on 4th Avenue, trying to shield a vintage copy of Wuthering Heights from the drizzle, when a stranger's umbrella tilted over my head. I looked up, prepared to offer a polite, hurried smile, but the words died in my throat. It was Julian. He didn't look like a hero from a movie, he looked like a man who had seen the world and found it slightly exhausting, yet infinitely beautiful. He had these eyes, the color of whiskey held up to a candle, and a way of looking at you that made the rest of the street, the honking taxis, and the rushing crowds simply dissolve into a gray blur. I think the Bronte sisters would agree that some things are worth keeping dry, he said. His voice was a low, melodic baritone that vibrated right in the center of my chest. That was the beginning of the us that would eventually define my entire existence. Our first few months were a fevered dream of shared moments and whispered secrets. We were two puzzle pieces that didn't just fit, we fused. I remember a night in late October, sitting on the fire escape of his apartment in Queen Anne. The city lights were flickering below us like fallen stars. Julian was tracing the lines of my palm, his touch so light it was almost a suggestion. "What are you looking for?" I whispered, leaning my head against his shoulder. The scent of his wool coat, sandalwood and cold air, was more intoxicating than the wine we'd been drinking. "The future," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm looking at these lines and wondering if I'm in them. Because Elara, I've spent 30 years wandering, and I think I just found the place I want to stay." I felt a terrifying, beautiful ache in my soul. It was the kind of vulnerability that usually makes you want to run, but with Julian, I wanted to dive deeper. We spent hours in a small booth at a 24-hour diner, talking about the things people usually hide, the fear of being forgotten, the regret of words left unsaid to parents who were gone, the strange beauty of a New York subway at 3 a.m. He told me about his childhood in Montana, the vastness of the sky, and how he used to think the stars were holes poked in a velvet curtain. I showed him my sketches, the ones I never showed anyone, the charcoal drawings of faces in the crowd, eyes filled with longing. He didn't just look at them, he saw me. He saw the girl who was afraid of her own light. "You're glowing," he told me once, as we walked through a park covered in golden maple leaves. "Not just because of the sun, Elara. There's a frequency you vibrate on. It's like you're the only thing in this world that's truly, undeniably alive." Our chemistry wasn't just physical, it was an intellectual and emotional resonance. We could spend an entire evening in silence, reading by the fire, and it would feel more intimate than 1,000 conversations. He knew how I took my coffee, black with a single grain of salt to cut the bitterness. He knew that I hummed when I was nervous and that I couldn't stand the sound of ticking clocks. But it was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, with a fierce, protective tenderness, that truly undid me. We were building a world, a sanctuary made of inside jokes, shared playlists, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. I believed, with the naive certainty of the deeply smitten, that we were untouchable. I thought our love was a shield. I didn't realize that sometimes, the things that burn the brightest are the first to be reclaimed by the dark. It started so subtly that I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. A slight tremor in my hand when I reached for a glass. A moment of profound exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. Then, the color started to change. Not the world, that stayed vibrant, but me. It was as if someone had reached inside and turned down the dimmer switch on my soul. I was fading. I could feel the edges of my consciousness fraying, a fog rolling in from a sea I didn't know existed. At first, I hid it from Julian. I laughed louder, applied more blush to my pale cheeks, and forced myself to stay awake during our movie nights until my eyes burned. But you can't hide a storm from the person who lives in your heart. The turning point came on a Saturday in December. We were supposed to go to a gallery opening, an event I had been looking forward to for weeks. I was standing in front of the mirror, trying to zip up a silk dress, when the world simply tilted. The floor became a vertical wall, and the light from the vanity mirror exploded into 1,000 stinging needles. I woke up on the bathroom floor with Julian's face hovering over mine. His expression was a map of pure, unadulterated terror. "Elara? Elara, talk to me. Please." "I'm just tired, Jules," I whispered, my tongue feeling like a heavy, leaden weight. "The lights, they're too loud." The confusion that followed was a slow-motion car crash. Doctors, tests, sterile rooms that smelled of bleach and despair. But it wasn't just a physical sickness. It was as if I was being pulled into a different dimension, one where Julian's voice was a faint echo across a vast canyon. I saw his fear growing, a dark ivy strangling the joy we had cultivated. He started researching, his desk piled high with medical journals, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "We'll find it," he would say, clutching my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. "Whatever this is, we'll beat it. I'm not letting you go, Elara. Do you hear me?" But the tension simmered. I became irritable, frustrated by my own body's betrayal. I would snap at him for the way he hovered, for the way he looked at me with pity instead of passion. The us we had built was cracking under the weight of a mystery we couldn't solve. I was becoming unreachable, drifting into a silent world where even his touch felt distant. One night, the tension finally broke. I had forgotten his name for a split second, just a second, but the look of devastation on his face was enough to shatter the last of my resolve. "Get out," I screamed, the words tearing through the quiet of the apartment. "I can't do this. I can't watch you watch me die. Just leave me to the dark, Julian. Please, just let me go." He didn't move. He stood there, bathed in the blue light of the television, looking at me not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. "You think this is about you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You think I'm here for the girl who glows? I'm here for you, Elara. The girl who hums when she's nervous. The girl who's lost in the fog. If you're going into the dark, then I'm going in with you. I will be the one holding the lantern until my arm falls off. But I am never, ever leaving." He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. I fought him at first, hitting his chest, sobbing with a primal, ugly grief. But he just held me. He absorbed the blows, the tears, and the terror. That was the night I realized that love isn't just a shared sunset, it's a shared shipwreck. And Julian was determined to be the anchor that kept us from drifting into the abyss. As my condition worsened, a strange transformation began to take hold of Julian. He didn't leave, but the man I knew, the one who made jokes about the Bronte sisters and laughed at the rain, began to withdraw into a fortress of his own making. He became a shadow, moving through our life with a quiet, devastating intensity. He stopped talking about the future. There were no more mentions of trips to Montana or the house we would one day buy. His world had shrunk to the size of our bedroom and the rhythm of my failing health. I watched from the periphery of my own consciousness as he unraveled. He lost weight, his cheekbones becoming sharp enough to cut, and his silence became a living thing between us. It wasn't a cold silence, it was a heavy one, pregnant with all the things he couldn't say. He would sit by my bed for hours, his hand resting on mine, staring out the window at the gray Seattle sky. I could see the inner war raging behind his eyes. He was breaking, his spirit being ground down by the relentless march of my decline, yet his love remained the only constant in the room. He took over everything. He became my nurse, my cook, my gatekeeper. He learned how to administer IVs, how to read my heart rate, how to tell when a seizure was coming before I even felt the first flicker. But the cost was visible in every line of his face. He was aging in dog years, the light in his whiskey-colored eyes replaced by a dull, flickering embers of sheer will. Once, in the middle of the night, I woke up to find him slumped in the chair beside me, weeping. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but a quiet, rhythmic shaking of his shoulders. He thought I was asleep. He reached out and touched my hair, his fingers trembling. "I can't find you," he whispered to the shadows. "Elara, where did you go?" "I'm right here. I'm still here. Please, just come back for a minute. just 1 minute. It broke my heart in a way the sickness never could. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I was still there, trapped inside a glass box, watching him shatter. But the words wouldn't come. My mind was a maze with no exit. He started pulling away from his friends, his work, everything that made him Julian. He became a ghost in his own life, a man possessed by a single, desperate mission, to keep me alive. His quiet strength was terrifying. He never complained, never asked for help, never let a single tear fall when he thought I was looking. He was fighting a war on two fronts, against the disease that was stealing me, and against the despair that was trying to claim him. There was a day when the doctor suggested hospice, the comfort phase. Julian didn't scream. He didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at the doctor with a cold, terrifying clarity. "She isn't a terminal case," Julian said, his voice like grinding stones. "She is my wife. And we haven't tried everything. You see a patient. I see the woman who owns my soul. Now, get out of this room and find me someone who actually wants to save her." He was losing his way, drifting into a dark obsession with a cure that didn't seem to exist. He was becoming someone else, someone harder, someone more dangerous to himself. But even as he broke, even as his mind frayed at the edges, he refused to let go of my hand. His love wasn't a soft thing anymore, it was a jagged, desperate weapon he was using to hold back the night. The breakthrough didn't come from a doctor. It came from Julian's refusal to accept the unknown. While I drifted in and out of a medicated haze, Julian had turned our second bedroom into a war room. He had been tracking everything, every meal, every medication, every person who had entered our lives in the 6 months before I fell ill. It felt like an emotional investigation, a man trying to solve a crime where the victim was still breathing but the life was gone. He began to suspect that my sickness wasn't a biological fluke. He found a pattern in my old workplace, a chemical research firm where I'd worked as a junior designer. He discovered a suppressed report about a leak, a specific neurotoxin that mimicked the symptoms of early-onset dementia and autoimmune failure. The realization shifted something in him. The sorrow was replaced by a cold, burning rage. He wasn't just fighting a ghost anymore, he was fighting a corporation, a group of people who had decided that a leak was cheaper to cover up than to fix. I remember a night when he came into the room, his eyes wild with a different kind of light. He sat on the edge of the bed and showed me a file, a stolen internal memo. "They knew, Elara," he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. "They knew the ventilation was compromised. They knew what it would do to the people on your floor. They just didn't care." The momentum of the story shifted then. It wasn't about the fog anymore, it was about the truth. Julian began a dangerous game of cat and mouse. He reached out to whistleblowers, he spent our life savings on private investigators, and he confronted the men in suits who tried to buy his silence. I saw him one evening after a meeting with their lawyers. He had a bruise on his cheek and his shirt was torn. He looked like he'd been in a physical brawl, but his expression was triumphant. "They tried to intimidate me," he said, kneeling by my bed. He took my hand and kissed each of my fingers. "They don't understand. They think I'm a man who wants money. They don't realize I'm a man who has nothing left to lose except you. And that makes me the most dangerous person they've ever met." His decision was absolute. He chose to act, to risk everything, his reputation, his safety, his freedom, to bring the truth to light. He wasn't just trying to save my life anymore, he was trying to restore the justice that had been stolen from us. He spent nights on the phone with journalists, leaking documents, building a case that would eventually tear that company apart. But it wasn't just about the legal battle. He found a specialist in Switzerland who was working on an experimental treatment for that specific toxin. It was a long shot, a dangerous procedure that could just as easily end everything. "Elara," he said, holding my face in his hands. It was the first time in months he had looked at me with the old Julian intensity. "I found a way back. It's a narrow bridge, and it's swinging in the wind. But I'm going to carry you across it. Do you trust me?" I couldn't speak, but I squeezed his hand. In that moment, the urgency was palpable. We were no longer waiting for the end, we were charging toward a beginning. He had uncovered what was taken, and he was prepared to burn the world down to get it back. The Julian who returned from Switzerland with me a year later was not the man who had shielded me with an umbrella in the rain. That man was gone, buried under the weight of the war he had fought. The treatment had worked, slowly, painfully, the fog had lifted. My strength returned, the tremor stopped, and the colors of the world bled back into my vision. But as I healed, I realized that the price of my life had been his soul's innocence. Julian had changed. Physically, he was leaner, his hair shot through with premature streaks of silver. But the real change was in his eyes. The whiskey-colored warmth had been replaced by a hardened, flinty gaze. He moved with a guardedness, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and knew exactly how to survive it. He had become someone who didn't trust easily. He checked the locks on our doors 3 times every night. He scanned every room we entered for exits. The love he felt for me was still there, but it had become a heavy, protective armor. It wasn't sweet anymore, it was fierce and possessive. I watched him one afternoon in our new home, a quiet place far from the city. He was chopping wood in the yard, his movements rhythmic and powerful. He looked like a man made of scars and iron. When he saw me watching him from the porch, he didn't smile immediately. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of our shared survival. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" I asked later that night, as we sat on the porch. "The man you used to be." Julian looked out at the dark treeline. "I don't think I'd recognize him if he walked up the driveway, Elara. That man believed the world was fundamentally good. He thought love was enough to keep the rain off. He was naive. But he was happy," I whispered. Julian turned to me, and for a second, I saw the old Julian flicker in the shadows. He reached out and traced the line of my jaw, the same gesture he'd used on the fire escape a lifetime ago. "I'm not happy, Elara. I'm something else. I'm grateful. I traded my peace for your breath. I traded my light for your life. And if I had to do it 1,000 times over, I wouldn't change a single second of it." It was a bittersweet realization. His love had saved me, but it had also scarred him. He had become a warrior for a cause that was now won, and he didn't know how to put down his sword. We lived in the aftermath of a miracle, a life built on the ruins of who we used to be. He had become a man who understood the true cost of forever. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a transaction. He had paid for our future with his own peace of mind. And as I looked at him, I realized that I loved this man even more than the one I had met in the rain. This man was a testament to the devastating power of devotion. He was broken, yes, but he was broken in all the right places, the places where love had forced its way through. Now, as I sit here writing this, the sun is setting over the mountains, casting long, amber shadows across the floor. Julian is in the kitchen, the familiar clatter of plates providing a heartbeat to the house. We survived. We are the lucky ones. But I've learned something in the years since the fog lifted. I've learned that love doesn't just heal, it hurts. It's a beautiful, agonizing tension that pulls you toward another person until you don't know where you end and they begin. It's the fear of losing them again, the memory of the dark, and the knowledge of what it cost to stay together. Sometimes, I see Julian staring at his hands, and I know he's remembering the weight of the 4 bags and the feel of the legal documents. I know he's thinking about the man he left behind in that war room. And I feel a sharp, familiar ache in my chest. Love and pain are not opposites, they are 2 sides of the same coin. You cannot have the depth of one without the capacity for the other. The more you love, the more you have to lose, and the more it hurts when the world tries to take it. We don't talk about the glow anymore. We talk about the gravity. We are 2 bodies held in orbit by a force we can't fully explain, a force that is sometimes heavy, sometimes crushing, but always, always there. Tonight, Julian came out to the porch and sat down beside me. He didn't say anything. He just took my hand and leaned his head back, watching the first stars appear. His hand was rough, calloused, and warm. It felt like home. I looked at him, at the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the man who had walked through hell to bring me back, and I realized that this is what true romance looks like. It isn't the umbrella in the rain, it's the person who stays when the umbrella blows away and the storm turns into a hurricane. We are a story of survival, a testament to the fact that love is the only thing worth breaking for. And as the darkness settles over the mountains, I find myself thinking about that first day in Seattle, and all the things I didn't know then. I didn't know that love would change us, scar us, and eventually save us. I wouldn't trade the pain for anything. Because the pain is the proof that it was real. The pain is the evidence that we fought for something beautiful, and we won. They say you don't feel the earth move when you fall in love. But I know better now. You feel it move when you realize that someone is willing to hold the earth still for you, even if it breaks them. Julian turned to me then, his eyes catching the light of the rising moon. You okay? He asked. I smiled, a slow, deep feeling of peace settling over me. I'm perfect, I said. And as I leaned into him, I realized the ultimate truth of our journey: love is the most beautiful thing in the world, precisely because it is the only thing that hurts enough to matter.